We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else.
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer. That designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's dive in, shall we? This is an important point to keep in mind. While the evolutionary process proposes ways in which life could change over time in response to its environment, it does not explain how the very first life form came into being. Let's think about this in a slightly different way. Evolutionary theory aims to explain how biological organisms change over time and share common ancestry. The theory of evolution by natural selection, proposed by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, is one example out of a network of different and changing evolutionary theories. These are explored in the scientific field of evolutionary biology. Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. And as Dawkins has just mentioned, no one knows how the first life form began to exist. Since biology is the study of life or life forms, that means no one knows how biology began to exist. Consequently, no biologist can claim to understand the actual essence of the subject of their study. They just accept that it's there and that it exists and then try to study how it operates. What we do know is that at one point, the Earth consisted of an atmosphere and oceans, and then at some point, life happened. There's a lot that needs to happen in between. There's no known scientific process which can produce such complexity out of these simple chemical parts. There's also no evidence for how that could have happened. The closest we have to evidence is the Miller-Urey experiment from 1952, in which amino acids were synthesized from similar parts, although this was done under extremely controlled laboratory conditions. The first issue is that the early Earth was not controlled in this way. The second issue is that the proposed estimate of 700 million years would not necessarily lead to that happening. It could just as easily have continued to be a lifeless atmosphere and ocean to the present day. The third and biggest issue is that amino acids don't necessarily lead to life. There is an incomprehensible number of steps that need to happen between that and life forming, which we know very little of. Given the immense unknown of how the first life forms began to exist, Dawkins has resorted to aliens as an explanation. There are a few issues with that, apart from the obvious ones. First, we don't have any evidence of aliens existing. What we do have are conspiracy theories, which by definition are based on scientifically unreliable sources. Second, if aliens created the first life on Earth, how did the first life on the aliens' planet come about? That explanation just pushes the problem back a bit, but we're still left exactly where we started. Third, this type of reasoning is very similar to what's referred to as the God of the Gaps explanation. This is when people use God as an explanation for something they don't yet understand. Dawkins is resorting to an explanation similar to that used by the blindly religious. Theists would not resort to this blind type of reasoning. Dawkins here mentions that the fields of biochemistry and molecular biology reveal a complexity in life which could very well be attributed to an intelligent designer. The existence of the DNA molecule, for example, is indescribably improbable, and it has to be so specifically fine-tuned in order for life to emerge through it, nearly without any margin of error. The extreme unlikelihood of DNA being so complex and also forming such a specific pattern is one of the many reasons why Dawkins can appeal to a designer. Scientifically speaking, the only cause we know of that could create such complexity out of simple building blocks is an intelligence. When we see a skyscraper, we don't assume that winds carried raw materials together to form it. We know that an intelligence designed and created it, in this case a human being. After mentioning that no one knows how life began, and that there is a scientifically possible signature of an intelligent designer in the building blocks of life, Dawkins now defines conditions for this complete unknown. He says that it must be something physical. But how can he make such a claim without knowing anything about life's cause? Given the context, the cause could just as well have been non-physical. The theist can comfortably turn to an immaterial, beginningless, and uncaused creator as the cause, otherwise referred to as God, which is quite reasonable here. But Dawkins has no grounds to put any limits to what the cause can or cannot be. The most he can say is that he doesn't know at all, just as he's already said. He just needs to consistently reaffirm that he doesn't know. This limiting statement doesn't seem to fit and is quite clearly illogical. In summary, we can see that these arguments are just as unsound as our first impression. Let's keep looking for some stronger arguments, shall we?